Hi, welcome to class. We're the only two right now, but the other ones will show up eventually, right? I hate my life. I hate my life. A Professor Sunrise Productions! Hello class, Professor Sunrise here. In today's class we're taking a look at the new format and how it will impact Dlink. Of course, the format hasn't been out for quite some time now, and I haven't done as much testing as I would like to, but tomorrow, at least if I upload this video today, there will be a regional here in Germany, which I will be attending, and especially after that I should probably get a good grasp of how the format has shifted. But for now we will be taking a look at all of the new decks, all of the new non-engine, how decks have shaped up, so old established deck like Kashtira, how they changed up their non-engine, for example, and how all of these things impact Link and how Link can use their own engine to combat said things. So without further ado, don't forget to like and subscribe, leave some feedback down the comment section below, and let's get right into the video. So for a mood spoiler for the new format, Link is like, I don't know about that. More shifters and more trolls, to some degree even Ogre, hurt this deck really, and you have to play around accordingly. I'm even thinking about going back to Bystial control, but this Sparta is just way too good to pass up on, and also I fear that I don't have enough gas, especially if you trade high impact hand traps against high impact hand traps. Just having more gas in the tank and having that one extra disruption, that one extra push, just really impactful. And also this Sparta is just insane in the turn 3, and a lot of games will just go there because of how the meta is shaped up currently. Because of all of those things, I'm currently trying to build like a mixture between Link and Bystial control, because playstyle wise, Link will always just go for Seal Pass anyway, especially now with Ogre, but most importantly, Droll and Shifter being in the meta. So oftentimes you will just go for a Lubellion, it will get Drolled, you normal summon any random dragon, you make your Magnamut, resolve it, go for Lubellion, get the Branded Beast, Seal Pass with Branded Beast, resolve Magnamut hopefully and get something good. So a lot of times you can't even commit a lot of times, so I wanted to just get consistently through all of those hand traps through that, and then importantly still have a very good turn 3 with more gas. And I think I've got a very good list cooking up, which I'm just gonna test at the regional, and if it works really well, I mean, no matter how it works, I will give you guys an updated deck profile for Link. But if it doesn't work out, I will definitely take a look at Bystial control and kick the whole rocket engine altogether. Also, the rockets give a very good ability to go into Borderland, and towers are really good right now. Of course, a lot of people are prepared for towers, more on that later, but in turn 3, once the non-engine got used up already, Link has a very unique niche in having the ability to go into Borderland or Chaos Angel, I think, yeah. So 2 very strong towers. A lot of decks have no out-2 in their engine whatsoever. So Kashtira, Super Heavy Samurais, and Sword Soul all struggle to deal with those. Especially Borderland against Super Heavy Samurais, they have no way of dealing, because the one kaiju that they can search in their combo, you can just negate the Cleaford Genius, I think its name. So there's no way that they can out that. So overall, I think with Link or Bystial control, you'll have to adapt to people being on a lot of trolls. So just turning down the amount of engine you play and turning up the amount of non-engine you play will be very important. So I think Seal Pass is just the win con you want to go for. You will really want to focus on that, and everything else is just fancy, and you probably don't need it. Because you can play good amount of non-engine as well, which is super impactful, so you can get your sealing through that and then just have the resource loop of Seal and Magnamut going for you. And with all of that about Link, how we can combat, how we can adapt our non-engine, let's talk about some of the new decks. Super Heavy Samurais, of course, is a super strong deck, and usually will just win the hand trap brawls just because they have way more one-card starters and they can play more hand traps. So even if you commit into them or you draw them, they do still have a lot of good options, especially going second, because they're just a little bit more adaptable to draw. But if you make them go first, or they are going first and you draw them, you usually have a decent time because they cannot end on too much. Bystials don't really do anything against them, they aren't even alive. And my biggest problem, at least for now, which is like kind of like all over in the format, is that there are just so many variants running around. It's super hard to, especially now in the beginning, to prepare for them, because there's like hand loop variant with this Sparta or Omega, or even with like another card, I can't think of its name right now. There's just strong board backed up by hand traps, so you can go for like Barone, Appaloosa, and then just have 2 hand traps in your hand and a shit ton of follow-up, which is strong as fuck. And then there's the FTK variant. Of course, Droll is good against all of them. But Dark Ruler could be very good against the strong board variant, but then it's really bad against the hand loop or the FTK variant, so it's really hard to prepare for the deck right now. But of course, this is by no means a tier 0 deck. It does have some pretty severe weaknesses. Most importantly, I remember playing Virtual World, having 12 starters in the Virtual World names. so you have an 85% chance of seeing one of them. And of course, in virtual world, you need it too, so you will be bricking a little bit more, but 15% chance to brick is nothing to scoff at. And you have to take into consideration that the deck plays a shit ton of one-offs from the Tunneler card, which lets you draw 2 and recycle your main deck cards, to the Ancient Gearbox. These are just cards you don't want to draw. Of course, there are a lot of one-offs, which they can help play around certain stuff, but overall, the deck has a lot of bricks, in my opinion, more than you would probably like to, but most importantly, it cannot really up its consistency from these 12 cards. So it does have a little bit of a consistency issue, but of course, these are all one-card starters, and if you have 4 hand trap plus one card starter and your opponent doesn't have a hand trap, you will just win no matter what. But also it does have a really hard time against Droll, and especially Ogre is going to be really good against it, because Ogre on the scale is just insanely good value, and so the deck will have to combat those, and especially probably having the biggest target on the back just because it is so scary. People will be over preparing for that, so we have to keep that in mind as well. But overall, this is probably the deck which I want to prepare for the most. But sadly, Ogres seem a little risky, at least for now, in the main deck, just because Kashtira is still a very huge threat and probably still the hardest matchup for us, and Ogre is just not good enough against that, so I'd rather put those Ogres in the side deck and then have a main deck which is well-rounded against everything, especially on the regional level, because there might still be some random crap running around, so I don't want to over-prepare for it too much. But in my opinion, this is probably the stronger of the 2 new decks. Next, let's talk about Purrely. Honestly, I'm not too scared about it. It seems to get hit by all of the other non-engines people are already playing, so people are playing Kaijus, not only because it's really good against the X-Noir, whatever it's called, X-Noir, Noir, however, but it's also really good against the Rysart, so people were playing that before, and it just gets hit by those as collateral damage, but also Droll is really good against it, Ogre is really solid against it, so it's a very solid deck, but it just happens to get hit by the same non-engine people are already playing, and it's just not as strong as Super Heavy Samurai or not as strong as Kashtira. But overall, the end board is really scary, having that huge tower which can remove probably like 3 cards and then having a 2 to 3 bounces with the Liberators XYZ, but most importantly, drawing probably like 4 cards in your standby phase and having a full hand, and if you happen to out the Noir, they get back like 3 to 4 cards depending on how much they have on the board. It's really hard to get into a grind game with them unless you can play towers like Borderland or Chaos Angel, because they have no engine out for that, and even like a big Nip token and a skill drain can just completely kill the deck because they just have no way of dealing with that. But of course, I said I'm not too scared about it, because honestly, one non-engine in the deck usually cannot do the most scary thing, like an Imperm on the darkness of the guys, like the darkness cat can be really good because they have to commit a lot more and they can just get as much out. They don't have their Purrely permanent spell, which gives them 3 cards back, so even if you out the XZs, they can't just plus infinitely. Like a Gamma is insane, Joel of course is also insane. Spot removal is really good against them, so if they play into your board, being able to just bounce their stuff is really solid as well. And overall, I'm not too scared, unless they have the cheesy OTK, but I think that's just a misplace. A few times I just get OTK'd because I randomly put stuff in attack position, so be careful and just put your stuff in the defense position, because they can OTK you out of nowhere, and there's no way to interact with them at some point. Good thing is Bystial's actually alive against them, and that can be somewhat disruptive because you can get rid of all of their Purrelys in the graveyard. You have to be careful because they could use their trap to basically fizzle your Bystial, but overall Bystials are at least alive against them, which of course really helps with consistency. Just resolving a Magnum in the opponent's turn is insane for consistency, getting you a Safer, your Lubellion, whatever you need. So that's really good. And once you hit like 1 or 2 of their light Purrelys and got them out of the graveyard, the deck cannot really function anymore because they want to keep summoning out of their deck and then plus off that. But if they only have like 2 Purrelys in their deck anymore, it can be really hard for them. The 2 worst parts about new decks coming in the format is that the 2 easiest things which we had in the meta with Mathmag and Branded will be played less. Branded even more because I don't think the deck is really good. Mathmag still has its niche because it doesn't really lose to all of those cards which are being played right now, especially Kaijus, and while Droll is really good, decent against them if they go first, going second, they don't really care about it too much. So overall, Mathmag is still going to be a decent call, but Branded is definitely going to be played less. So this is a little bad for us because our easiest matchups, which were like basically free in the last format, which are really solidly represented, especially if you take into consideration all of the runic life twin variants. So where they're like 40 to 50% of the meta, you could argue, where you just resolve 1 Magnum and they basically cry and they basically cannot win anymore if you have a decent hand with that. Those decks are gone, so this will be a huge downside for us. And also Kashtira, our worst matchup, can finally play, at least finally for them, play Shifter in the main deck again, because it hits stuff like Super Heavy Samurai quite effectively. Purrely also doesn't really like them getting banished, but it's not the end of the world. And Mathmag, of course, also doesn't like the stuff to be banished. So Kashtira can get away with playing Shifter in the main deck again, so this will be really hurting us, and this is probably the worst thing which could happen to us because of all of the meta shifters. Actually being a very solid card again in the main deck is really hard for us. To conclude, I would say that Bystial or Dlink is in a slightly worse position than it had been in the past format. The free matchups are just not there anymore, or they're way fewer. The non-engine is more hostile towards us, though I can think of ways to play around that. But of course, more on that on the deck profile of the updated Dlink/Bystial control after this weekend's regional. But overall, because the deck still has a decent amount of non-engine slots available to it, depending on how you build it, you can perform quite well in any format, basically, because you can adapt quite effectively, and Seal plus Magnemite is still one hell of a boss monster, honestly, and the resource loop is still there. You just have to adapt your non-engine and be worried about the most important stuff in the format. So, hope you guys enjoyed today's class. You guys are dismissed. Professor Sunreis out. Peace.